Hello, Internet. This is Sophia. I believe it was the ogre Shrek who is famous for saying that ogres are like onions in that they have layers. But it is not just ogres who share that trait with onions. As a human being, it is also very helpful to see your will, your locus of control as a... What the? Hey, Smokey, I gave you a picture of an onion. What's this I see here? Well, I figured people don't really like onions, but they do like cakes. So I figured that it doesn't matter what you figured. The human locus of control isn't like a cake. It is like an onion. You sure about that? Of course I'm sure. As a matter of fact, in the movie, when Shrek brought up onions, the donkey had the same idea as you do. But just like ogres, the human will isn't like a cake. It is like an onion. All right. Now that better? Much better. Now back to what I was saying. Shrek said that ogres are like onions, but as a human being, your will, your locus of control is also very much like an onion. It too has layers. In algorithmic rationalism, it is very important to understand this. Crucial for an algorithmic rationalist is the ancient Hellenistic philosophy of Stoicism. Its incorporation into algorithmic rationalism is necessary if we are to develop the necessary detachment that we need in order to see past many of our biases. More on that in a future video. However, as crucial as the Stoic philosophy is, it still has certain loose ends, and many people will not be able to truly incorporate Stoicism into themselves unless something is added to it to tie those loose ends. You see, Stoicism teaches us of a concept of locus of control. All things in Stoicism are divided into two categories: things which are truly ours to control, and things which are not so securely ours. One of the clearest explanations that we have of this is from Epictetus of the late 1st century and early 2nd century CE. As Epictetus explained, among the things that are truly our own are opinion, aim, desire, aversion, and things of that sort. Things that are not really securely ours, however, include money, property, our friends, public office, even our very bodies and our very own lives. The secret to always being content, of course, it is said, is to recognize this distinction, making full use of the things that are truly ours and letting go of the things that aren't really so securely ours. So where are these loose ends in Stoicism? Well, for starters, sometimes there's something that you just want to have or just want to avoid. Understanding the futility of wanting to control things that are external to yourself can sometimes help reduce these desires, but at a certain level, these desires can't always be simply philosophized away. This can include very basic things that we can understand very well why they're so hard to let go of, like the desire to avoid getting killed, or the desire to have food to eat. But even things that many people tend to dismiss as being petty, like wanting that latest smartphone, or an invite to go to a specific party, or even a congratulations from someone on a task that we completed. True. Understanding the futility of such external things may take a bit of the edge off of these desires, and over time may even lessen these desires even further. But it is not realistic to expect that these desires will go away entirely, or even be that quick to fade into something small and manageable. And there are also other ways that just because something is part of your mental process and not part of the outside world doesn't automatically mean that it is completely within your domain. Like, what if despite our best efforts, our mind wanders away from tasks that we ideally ought to do in favor of ones that are not as crucial, but far more interesting? Or what if, despite knowing the futility of being sad or angry about something, we are unable to stop ourselves from having such an emotional reaction? How can we process this from a Stoic perspective? How can we avoid placing unreasonable blame upon ourselves, all the while taking seriously our obligation to do such things right to the extent that we are able? Inversely, external things are never completely within our domain. Over anything outside of ourselves, we have at best indirect influence. However, while there are some things over which we have absolutely no influence, or very weak and/or unpredictable influence, there are things over which our influence is pretty strong and fairly predictable. For example, if you're driving a car, something could always happen that could cause the car to go completely out of your control. But usually, your car will go whatever way you direct it to go. How can you accept the reality that your control over your car isn't absolute, while still owning up to the fact that your control over it is generally pretty strong? The answer? Understand that it is all like layers of an onion. Say, for example, I ask you if you can have an elevator come to the floor that you are on. You respond, sure you can, but can you really? What if the elevator is broken? Well then, you failed to have the elevator come, but you did your part, which is pressing the button for it to come. You can surely do that part, right? Well, maybe not if the button is out of reach or otherwise inaccessible. But you can try. You can reach for the button, right? Well, really, we can keep going until we get down to the part where the brain sends the signal to the arm to press the elevator button. Each step we go one more layer into the onion. Each step, the influence of your will over the process becomes a little more direct. But there is always still something that can happen beyond your control that might interfere. But does this stop the moment we leave the world outside of our mind and enter our mind itself? Well, it doesn't. For example, it is generally considered to be a virtuous act to pay attention to a task that rightly ought to be done. Likewise, it is generally regarded as a vicious act, i.e., vice, to let your mind wander to something that is more interesting at the expense of tasks that crucially need your attention. But here's the thing. Your attention doesn't always stay for long where you choose to direct it. This is especially an issue for people with attention deficit disorder, but to a lesser extent, it affects pretty much everyone. If your mind keeps wandering from where it needs to be despite your best effort to focus on what it's supposed to be focused on and to move it back whenever you catch it wandering, that is no fault of your will. Likewise, it is no act of heroic virtue to keep laser-like attention on something that you should be focusing on when doing so is easy for you. You therefore have to go one layer further toward the core of the onion to find something that is a bit more under your control. Your mind may wander involuntarily, but ask yourself, do you at least attempt to keep it on track? And when it wanders, you might not always catch it doing so. But if you do catch your mind wandering, do you move it back to the task at hand, or at least make an earnest attempt to do so? And do you in general manage your life in such a manner so as to minimize the chances of a slip in attention having catastrophic results? At any rate, When we get down to this layer, it is this effort on your part to pay attention to your task that is where virtue or vice actually lies. And the end result of either actually paying attention to what you're supposed to or failing to do so becomes the so-called external, i.e. the preferred or dispreferred indifferent. Similarly, as I stated earlier, no matter how much we remind ourselves of the philosophical position that things outside of ourselves are not truly our own, and that therefore they are not worth being happy or upset over, the way our instincts are configured still gives them some power to actually make us happy or sad. But even when that happens, we shouldn't despair that we've failed in our practice of the philosophy. Rather, we should ask ourselves, did we at least attempt to remind ourselves of the principle of locus of control? Or did we fan the flames of our not-so-stoic feelings, thereby adding the force of our own volition to those feelings, even if a certain kernel of them was inevitable? When we learn to look at things at this layer, we realize that what is truly in our control is whether or not we make our best effort to remind ourselves of the nature of external things. And that is where virtue and vice really lie. The emotional fortitude that would hopefully come from this practice becomes in itself a preferred indifferent. In other words, yes, external things are not worth getting sad about. But if you attempt in earnest to remind yourself of this, but get sad about external things anyways, that is nothing to be ashamed of either. At any rate, there are probably lots of other examples of how there are things, even in your mind, that you don't entirely control. But even when those things happen, you can always go a layer deeper into the onion and find some level where your will does reside. A lot of ancient philosophers believe that the mind of a well-trained person becomes like an unassailable fortress. While I would agree that such a fortress can exist, I don't think it covers the entire mind. Rather, it is what you get if you go through all the layers and get at the very core of the onion. This is where I believe the inner sanctum can truly reside. At any rate, it would be quite impractical to think about all this every time you make every little decision in life. It would slow you down and... Seriously, Smokey? Not bad. Anyway, thinking about all this every time you make a decision in life will slow you down, and more importantly, it will slow you down in a very avoidable and unnecessary way. For example, next time you need to summon an elevator, you don't need to spend an hour going through all the layers of your will, from the core commitment to doing what needs to be done in the day, all the way to the most external layer of having the elevator arrive at your floor. But it is an important concept to keep in mind and to probe deeper when the situation calls for it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please remember to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already done so, and to use the bell icon next to the subscribe button to make sure that you get notified when I upload new videos in the future. Hit the thumbs up button if you like this video, and use the share icons to let your friends know about this video. Until next time, see ya!